What's up, everybody, and welcome in to another edition of the Sit Down. As always, if you enjoy this video, please be sure you hit that like button and let me know what you think of today's discussion in the comment section below. If you're new around here, you just haven't done it yet, or you're living in a rocket seeing this video for the first time, I don't know what you're waiting for. Hit that subscribe button below now so you never miss another sit down video. If you're checking us out currently on iTunes or Spotify, welcome in. Please leave us a detailed review and a 5-star rating. What's up, everybody, and welcome in. This is episode 203 of the Sit Down, and I'm your host, Jeff Nadu. Let's delve into another very interesting organized crime topic. And as I said on last week's show, over the next 5 to 7 weeks, I'm going to delve into the mafia today. What do each of these families look like in 2025? And we are going to start with the Bonanno Crime Family. Obviously, if we're doing it alphabetically, the Bonanno Crime Family would be first. And I think there are a few words to describe this family right now: messy and dysfunctional. The story of the 2025 Bonanno Crime Family next on the Sit Down. Now, obviously, when we talk about the Bonanno Crime Family, and with any of these families, you have to start with the boss, the man at the top, the man who makes all the decisions, the end game for this family. And it is, according to the government, Michael the Nose Mancuso. Now, Mancuso, who is 69 years old, is originally from the Harlem, Bronx area and actually came up with the East Harlem Purple Gang. You can see that he's in the middle of this photo, and on the left is actually Michael Meldish, who, weirdly enough, things would actually come full circle. And we'll talk later in this episode kind of how the end came from Meldish, but originally the end kind of ended Mancuso and Meldish's relationship through a woman. Now, as many of you know, Michael Mancuso in 1984 was arrested and later convicted and did time for manslaughter after it was found that he killed his own wife, a woman called Evelina, in 1984, and left her body on a bench in front of Jacoby Hospital, which is in New York City. He would eventually plead guilty to manslaughter and serve 10 years in prison. So this is a guy who's a pretty lethal guy. Now, he would state that it was an accident. It didn't mean to happen, and he ended up only getting 10 years because of it. He gets out in the 90s, goes right back to the streets, and kind of serves in the crew of the DiFilippo and then Basciano crew up in the Bronx. And we know through people like Dominic Cicale and just other media that that crew had a bunch of heavy hitters that are now basically in control of this family. The thing about the Bonanno Crime Family that I find interesting, and we've seen this with a group like the Lucchese family, the shifts of where these families were at one point are totally different as far as geographically. The Bonanno Crime Family has always been a Queens, Brooklyn, Staten Island based family. And we go back to even like Joe Bonanno, he was based in Brooklyn. We look at Joey Messino, based in Queens, but in Maspeth, which is right near Brooklyn. We know that a lot of this family's power base was under the control of those areas. It's now not in control, and now up in the Bronx, where all three of the hierarchy members are from that area. And this is what I found really interesting when looking into this family. It's not just geographical issues, it's a lot of shelved members. They've got a lot of members coming out of prison or have already come out of prison. And when we look at Mancuso, he is a Bronx guy, right? He comes up under Vinny Basciano. He then in 2004 participates in taking out a person called Randy Pizzola, who was a Bonanno associate involved in construction. He annoys Basciano, and multiple people are involved in taking him out in Greenpoint, Brooklyn in late 2004. They would include Mancuso, Ace Aiello, and some others. Now, Mancuso was ultimately hit with a long prison sentence. And this is where it gets interesting because, as we know, a lot of things change, and he kind of becomes the new guy. He would get 15 years for the involvement in the Randy Pizzola hit and report to prison. Now, during his time in prison, a lot changes, right? Joey Messino cooperates. Most of the hierarchy and high-end people in the family go to prison. And Mancuso is made boss in around 2010. Basciano gets life. Cicale flips. A lot of the people in the Bronx are gone. DiFilippo's off the street. Spirito's off the street. Everybody's off the street. And Mancuso is kind of the heir apparent to becoming next boss. Now, while he's in prison, remember, geographically, the Brooklyn, Staten Island people take notice and say, this guy's not capable of running this family. Let's pull all the captains and let's bring the power base of this family back to Brooklyn. Because remember, in those days, in like the early 2010s into 2015, there are powerful people in Brooklyn like Joe Camerano Jr., Vinny TV Badalamenti, Johnny Skyway Palazzola. So those guys kind of say, well, let's just get a boss on the street and we're going to pull everybody. And Mancuso is hot over this. He's furious. He shelves Camerano, and Camerano to this day is shelved. And that brings us to when Mancuso was released in, I think, 2019. We also saw some things develop where he allegedly sent members of the family to a funeral for someone in Camerano's extended family, and 3 members who we'll talk about assault or attempt to assault Camerano and others, including his brother Dino, who was connected to a biker gang, and a big fracas happens. This was a real black eye on this family. This was a low-life move if it was ordered by Mancuso, which who else would have been ordered by? We also had heard reports that Camerano's house was shot at one point, though that was a lot of unconfirmed reports. But this is kind of the confusion and messiness of Michael Mancuso. And quite recently, he went to prison after he violated the terms of the supervised release because he was seen in photos like this associating with known felons like the guy in the black, the alleged underboss to this family, John Spirito Jr., who came up under and with Mancuso in the original crew of Vinny Basciano. So let's get into the underboss, John Spirito, the man in the black there, who actually, Mancuso went to jail and was released several months ago. Spirito did not get sent to prison over this. And while Mancuso was in prison, it was alleged that Spirito was the guy on the street as far as an acting street boss at the time, but he is considered the second in command. Spirito is an interesting guy as well. They call him Johnny Joe. He is 66 years old, so he's just a few years younger than Mancuso. He is also from the Bronx. I know he's moved around Pelham Bay over the years and that sort of area. He comes up, as I said, under Vinny Basciano, and actually was pretty close with the original captain of that crew, Patty from the Bronx, DiFilippo. Now, in 1999, on orders of Joey Messino and Salvatore Vitali, the captain, Patty from the Bronx, and Spirito took out a person called Gerlando George from Canada, Shasha, who was a major dope dealer, was someone that Messino viewed as a threat, and these two were given the hit. They took him out, dumped his body. He would get 20 years, Spirito, in that case, and for a long time was pretty quiet. So from the early 2000s till approximately 2015-ish, we didn't hear much from him. That said, there was a bizarre story that came to light while he was in prison. According to what we know, Spirito was sent to the SHU, segregated housing unit, inside FCI Farrington after it was alleged that he was involved in ordering the beating of a person called Albert Krishy. Now, Krishy is a known mob associate and was in prison as well. And from what we understand, Mr. Krishy's wife, a person called Danielle, was supposedly going to participate in a season of the VH1 hit TV series Mob Wives. And it was said that Spirito was very unhappy over this, and certain people assaulted Mr. Krishy inside prison. Now, nothing really came of it, and I don't believe Mr. Spirito encompassed any more charges after that. He would get out, and he's on the street today and was seen in photos like this, which were pretty bad for him and for the boss of his family, because Mancuso would go away over this photo. It's funny, I have a TikTok, as many of you know, and I did a video on this situation. in 2023, and I think it's my most viewed TikTok. I think I got like 4 million views on it. It was an insanely popular post, but this is again the problems that exist in 2024, 2025, and beyond. You can't escape photos, you can't escape videos, and as we've seen the mafia, wane and wane, it's a lot has to do with surveillance. These guys are out there. They're social media. They go to parties. People want to take photos. That's a real problem. And when you are someone who many people say, what's wrong with taking photos? Well, there's nothing wrong with taking photos. If you are someone who, abides by the law and you're not under supervised release requests, you can take photos with anybody you want. But these are two people who are convicted felons and they are under supervised release, which means that you cannot associate with felons. Associating with each other is breaking the terms of that. And that's why Mr. Mancuso was sent to prison. So these are the two heads of the current Bonanno crime family right now. As we know, the number 3 in a family, as far as the mafia, is called the Consigliere, right? The counselor, the person who is an advisor, if you will, to the boss. And while generally in mob lore, the Consigliere is generally an older person, a long-time person in the family, a guy who's seen a thing or two, a guy who can kind of stick up for people and deal with struggle and issue. That said, one of the youngest people in this family currently is Ernie Aiello, and it's alleged that he is the current number 3 in this family. And Ernie Aiello is no stranger to being around. He knows many people. He knows a lot of other families. And he is also related, as far as what we know, to Michael Mancuso. In recorded conversations between Ernest Aiello and mob informant Anthony Zoccalillo, Mr. Aiello would boast that he was the, quote, cousin of Mr. Mancuso. And during Mancuso's prison stay that I talked about earlier, Aiello was allegedly ferrying messages between Mancuso in prison to the streets. We would also learn that Aiello is actually from Morris Park, which is in the Bronx. He hung around Loretto Park as a kid. And if you know anything about Morris Park, it's a very Italian neighborhood. Aiello gained a pretty known reputation. One thing about Aiello that we do know, very lethal guy. A guy not willing, very much willing to, hurt somebody. If somebody needs dealt with, he deals with it. Kind of a pit bull type of guy, right? But we would learn some bizarre things from Zoccalillo, who, again, is an informant. Okay, so we have to take a lot of what he says with a grain of salt, but he would paint a really bizarre picture of Mr. Aiello. According to Zoccalillo, him and Aiello created an idea called The Neighborhood, which was a cartoon. And he would state that it's a, quote, Family Guy meets The Sopranos, in which a guy runs an organized crime family out of the Bronx, and around him is a bunch of screw-ups. That's why it comes up as a comedy. He would also say, quote, we were going to build the cartoon on a video plan that was similar to other successful online ventures, and then eventually develop a video game at the same time. Now, he would also begin to state that Zoccalillo had connections in the media world because he was on a television show called Mama's Boys from the Bronx. It would come out in the early 2010s, late 2000s, and essentially feature a bunch of Italian guys from the Bronx who live with their mother. And Zoccalillo, we would find, was a mob associate. He knew all sorts of people. And Zoccalillo would state in his testimony as well that he had planned to get this stuff created through a woman who had the idea for the show, and that she was going to help us, quote, put it on and help us promote it through the reality show. He would also further state that me and Ernie worked hand in hand with developing characters and different ideas. Now, he had some input from friends, including Vinny Gorgeous Basciano. We were looking to come up with different episodes, ideas, different stories throughout our lives that we went through and that were pretty funny, and turned it into cartoon characters. Zoccalillo would insist that it was a, quote, real business venture, and that Ernie Aiello invested $25K in a company they formed called Bella Gigi LLC, which was incorporated in early to mid 2010. The company's address on the incorporated papers introduced into evidence was the home address of Aiello's mother. And the company was named for Zoccolilo's daughter and one of Aiello's daughters. So basically, these guys had an idea in the 2010s to create a television show, a cartoon about the mob. And that, according to Zoccolilo, Vinny Gorgeous was even involved in creating character ideas. This is kind of where the mob is in the 2010s, the 2020s. Like it is a bit of a joke, if we're being honest. I mean, the sheer thought of made guys and associates with business ideas that basically unearth the lives they live is a bit insane, but it's par for the course for some of these guys. Now, Ernie Aiello, seen on the far right, was also involved in the early 2010s, as well as other members of this family, including the guy in the middle, Vito Badamo, in kind of an enterprise racketeering case involving bookmaking and loan sharking and extortion. We also do know that around this time as well, Michael Meldish, who we talked about, kind of a coming back to where we were at the beginning. Meldish, who's a known guy in the Bronx, known guy in Harlem, he's assaulted in, I believe, 2013 outside of Rayo's. And supposedly Aiello was involved in this beating, and he was sent by Mancuso over a woman. We also do know that several, months later or years later, Meldish is taken out. Now, one of the theories is this has to do with Mancuso. That wasn't proven. It was actually, people were convicted of this case, and it did involve Mancuso. That said, Meldish was beaten at one point by members and associates of the Bonanno Crime Family. We also know that Aiello, who is Mr. Mancuso's cousin, was one of the people involved in that funeral dust-up. I believe it was in 2022. This was at the funeral of Vito Grimaldi, a Bonanno member. Grimaldi and Joe Camerano, who we talked about. Camerano was there because I believe he married Grimaldi's daughter. This is his father-in-law. He was told not to come to the funeral because he was shelved. You're not allowed, which is an insane request by Mancuso. This is his father-in-law. Camerano says, "Fafanculo," basically. He goes. Now, as far as what we know, Aiello, John Spirito Jr., the son of John Spirito Sr., and a veteran member of the family, Johnny Mulberry Scria Mamano, went to a funeral home in Glen Cove, Long Island, and attempted to assault Mr. Camerano and his brother Dino. Problem was, Dino, who was a biker, not in a 1% club or anything, he had friends there. They get involved, and a big fracas ensues. And this was a real black eye on this family. I mean, this is something that, think about, like, let's say back in the 70s or 80s, an old member passes and guys are fighting at the funeral. So we have guys fighting at funerals. We have guys creating video games, like just real wild shit right now. So hierarchy, we've completed, right? Mancuso, Spirito, Aiello, all in the Bronx. Power vacuums in the Bronx now. What do the other boroughs look like with this family? Is there tension? Might seem like it. Let's talk about some of the crews currently and some of the other things going on in this family I think are really interesting as we move through 2025 and even into, late 2025. One of the biggest current captains this family has, and well-known captains, is Jerry Asaro, the son of one-time Bonanno heavyweight Vinny Asaro. Jerome has had a crew for years. He's had a crew since, I believe, the 2000s. And Jerry is a guy who I think is a formidable guy when it comes to Queens, Brooklyn, Long Island. And my guess is a lot of the guys that were under Ronnie G, who's in prison, Ronnie G. Alonzo, who were in Queens, my guess is they're now under Jerry Asaro. Because if you know anything about Jerry and Ronnie G, they're related, right? I believe they're cousins. So I would assume that, guys like Michael Palmasio, Pudgy Festa, Michael Padavona, a lot of those guys, my guess is they'd be reporting to Asaro, who has had a crew for years. And in fact, when G. Alonzo was coming up, he was in Jerry Asaro's crew in the early 2000s. So my thought is that's kind of where that group is. And it will be interesting once Ronnie G gets out in a couple of years, Where does he slot in this family? Because, we do know that Ronnie's a formidable guy. He made a lot of money, had a huge loan sharking book, was a really formidable guy. We do know, though, that he does have cancer at this point. We wish him all the best. We hope he beats that. Where does he slot in, right? A lot of these guys, from what I understand, in Queens and in certain areas, do have a lot of legit businesses now, right? Whatever they're involved in. So does Ronnie G come out and go right back to the streets, which a lot of these people do? Does he continue to battle cancer? What all happens with Ronnie G? It's a really interesting question that I kind of have. We also wonder, what does the Brooklyn faction in this family look like? What is Vinny TV's involvement in the life now? Vinny TV's getting older. Vinny TV was a guy who, was very close with a lot of the Brooklyn, Staten Island people. Where does he slot into all this? Where does Johnny Skyway fit in with all this? Palazzolo, he's been around a while. Where are they? Where's Joe Camerano? We do know, and beyond a reasonable doubt, we can see with some of the things that have happened in this family, they don't respect the rules anymore. They shelve people, and then those shelf people are back, and it's real messy, as I'll explain here. So they're all Brooklyn people. Some of them are not, but most of those guys, whether it's Vinny TV, Johnny Skyway, some of those guys are Brooklyn people. Some of those guys came up under TG Graziano or those types. Where do they fit in? We've also seen bizarre videos involving members of this family like this. This was a video back in 2022 involving a member of this family called Anthony Calabrese. His father, Peter Rabbit Calabrese, was a longtime member. This popped up between an interleague baseball series between the Mets and the Yankees, where Calabrese is seen on his son's TikTok account, kind of in a funny exchange with someone on the phone about Joey Gallo, who is a baseball player for the Yankees, or was. I don't believe he still is. I could be wrong there, but this is kind of where we see these guys pop up. We don't see them pop up for much more other than things like this. We do know that Anthony Calabrese is a Staten Island guy, originally a Brooklyn guy. Where does he fit in? Again, all these geographical people, where do they fit in? We haven't heard much from them. We also know that there is a Queens and Sicilian faction. One of them is headed allegedly by Anthony Pipitone, who at one point was connected to the Giannini crew out of Queens. Anthony Pipitone and his brother Vito, who I've talked about in other videos, they have recently, over the last couple of years, been involved with a bookmaking loan sharking case out of Queens and Long Island involving, coffee shops that are kind of, and social clubs that are, masks for bookmaking networks. And this was also connected to the dirty cop, Hector Rosario, out on Long Island that recently had a resolution. So kind of who fits in with them? We do know that it's possible that, maybe, I'm going to kind of get into who could be running these crews now, like on an acting basis. We also know that according to a chart put out by members of the Black Hand Forum, some respected guys, most of the people in the Black Hand Forum are assholes, but there are a couple of good guys like Joe Puzzles, shout out to him. I believe they put out a chart on who they believe is captains or acting captains. One of the people that they suspect is a captain currently is Anthony Facita. Now, Facita is a guy who is Sicilian and was also a Giannini crew guy back in the day. He was part of kind of the Ridgewood Boys faction. We also know that some of them believe that on an acting captain basis, Nat Muley and Vincenzo Massi are also acting captains. Now, it's possible that maybe Massi is an acting captain for Anthony Pipitone due to the fact that they're both from Queens, Giannini crew people. We also know that Nat Muley could be a suspected acting captain. Now, what's interesting about Nat Muley is Nat came up under Grimaldi. Vito Grimaldi was once in the crew of Vinny Asaro and now maybe a suspected captain. We don't know for who. So we will guess on that. We also see that in this acting captain photo is Vinny Collision, Vincent Caroleo, who in the mid-2010s was shelved, according to certain members, which we're going to talk about. So there's kind of some confusion here. Who are these guys acting captains for? What crews are they running? Are they even acting captains? Now, I do want to bring up Vinny Massey for a second because he's kind of an interesting guy. Vinny Massey is Sicilian. He was connected to the Giannini crew, Ridgewood Boys. He actually, at one point, did several years in prison for beating a person with a hammer who owed money to the Bonanno family. And that was done alongside Ace Aiello, who was also a Giannini crew guy. So you see all the tentacles. That's why I find this all so fascinating, because a lot of these people are connected at some point, right? And they all know each other. And we see that a lot of these former Giannini crew guys, there are two outcomes for the Giannini crew. Some are members or in prison currently and are members, or they became informants. There was really no difference in that crew. You either became a rat or you're still involved. And we see Facita, Pipitone, Nat Muley, Vinny Massey, all those guys were connected to the Giannini crew. We have also seen Fiordolino, Gambino, Bartolotta, all sorts of these guys, they became informants. So you either became one or the other. Pretty interesting. Now, I think one of the things that I also find really interesting in this family, like all these families, is you're going to have guys that are coming out of prison or in prison and going to be out in the next couple of years. How do they fit in? And remember, a lot of these guys have done 20 plus years. We know that over the last couple of years, Fabrizio DeFrancisi has been released from prison. Does he have a standing in this family? Is he even involved in this family? We know that he allegedly got his button in the early 2000s. Now, we know that he is one of the only members originally of the Bath Avenue crew that is allegedly still involved. We know that all those members, they either were killed or became informants, or allegedly, they, like DeFrancisi, are still involved. We know that Calandra became an informant. We know Joey Calco became an informant. Tommy Reynolds was released recently. He's not fully Italian and not connected, as far as we know, to the life. He's going off and living his life in anonymity. We also know that Tommy or some were even killed, right? And that happened years ago. So there's a bit of a mishmash here. Where's Bruno Indelicato fit into all this? We know that Bruno's close to 80 years old. It's crazy to think that he's retired. Most of these people don't retire. Could he be acting in some sort of like advisory role, kind of like a coach that retires but still offers, some stuff and maybe gets an envelope? I don't know. There was unconfirmed reports that he was Consigliere, but I think that fell on kind of deaf ears. No one really believed that. And we do know that several people that just got released or will be released are connected and close to Mr. Indelicato, including Robert Lino on the left, who is, about to get out of prison. So that's something interesting too. That's kind of an interesting connection. Robert Lino is currently in a halfway house and scheduled for release next year. So, there's a lot of 10 degrees of separation. We also know Ace Aiello, who spent the last 20 plus years in prison. He's about to get out. He's currently, I believe, at Fort Dix. He's in there till 2029. Does he fit in? He was just an associate, right? Still probably is, actually. Maybe he got his button. I don't remember. But, does he come out? And these guys are all going to be under strict supervision. So it's hard to interact. And is it worth it nowadays? Is it worth, going back to prison over this? Now, one thing that I do want to kind of end all this on is the thought of being shelved in the mafia. It, for a long period of time, was pretty rare being shelved, essentially banished from the family. It's one step up from being whacked. This family shelves people like crazy. And they don't live on any of the rules either. Some people are shelved, but now back in the fold. Some people are shelved and we don't know where they are. Some people are shelved and, not involved. It's all really messy. And this family shelved people like crazy. And I think one thing I've noticed about them is they've used shelving as essentially a way to kill someone. You can't kill someone now, so we're going to just shelve a bunch of people. Now, we heard about some of this during the interview we did with Peter Lavaglio, which can be seen here. And Lavaglio talked about all sorts of shelving going on. And he talked about this in his testimony. Now, he would state that multiple members of this family were shelved, including a guy that I mentioned earlier that's called an acting captain currently, Vincent Carolillo, a.k.a. Vinny Collision. According to Peter Lavaglio, Vinny Goo, who they called him, was shelved in 2015. And Lavaglio was instructed by Joe Camarano Jr. to have an associate collect loan sharking payments for Carolillo. We now see that he may be back involved again. So the rules here are just kind of weird, right? When you shelve someone, they're banished for life. They're on the same level as like an informant. But now we see this guy's back involved. Was he really shelved? Was Lavaglio telling the truth? We also know that another guy that was supposed to be shelved was a person called Simone Esposito, who at one point was the consigliere of this family. Lavaglio would also state that in 2015, Esposito was shelved for stealing approximately $20,000 from the Bonanno family treasury, which was used to help incarcerated members and things of that nature. We don't know his current standing in this family. I haven't seen him on much chart or anything, so he may be shelved as well. We know the Camerano's shelved. Will he ever be allowed back in? My guess is no, because until Mancuso and the boys in the Bronx are out of the way, he's pretty much hated by this family. Now, there are a lot of people in the mob and connected to the mob that very much respect Mr. Camerano. And I think if I'm looking at it from a mobster, I would say this guy should be in charge of the family. Camerano is much more level-headed. He's much more respected. And he has a certain tinge of old school in him. His father was connected. He was a member. Camerano's been around a long time, and a lot of people respect him. So we always look at, in these families, is the right leadership there? That was probably a bad decision to put this family in control with Mancuso. So who knows? We also know that John Spirito Jr., who is a respected member of this family, he was also shelved at one point. According to Lavaglio, he was shelved for what Lavaglio described as ferrying fake messages to and from boss Michael Mancuso that he was the acting boss of the family. So he would go up to prison where Mancuso was and would tell the other members that he was the acting boss and everybody should listen to him. A real weird situation. He's now a respected guy again in this family. We also know that there was a rumor going around that Mr. Spirito, who was previously responsible for an $80,000 debt owed by a pot dealer, the family tried getting some of the money back, but it never happened. And whatever happened to the $80K that Spirito vouched for that they never got? This is where the rule breaking doesn't make sense. Like, they don't follow the old school rules. And that's where the messiness of the Bonanno crime family comes from. There's a lot of words that I can bring up, and a lot of it is just confusion. There's no following of rules anymore. The traditions are gone. We have guys that we have shelved, but now they're packing the fold. We have, guys that are creating video games and TV shows and, some people just, stop kicking up. Like, there are members of this family that live in Arizona and California. We don't know, they're members, but they don't, they've just disappeared. You can't go and lean on them and say, hey, you're a member of this family. You need to, kick up. Everybody just kind of does what they want to do. And there's this veil that they're in the mafia. It's kind of a mess, but I think this is where leadership comes in. Some of these families that we'll talk about over the next couple of weeks, they have quality leadership. They have quality ways to earn. That's another thing that I learned about the Bonanno family. It doesn't seem like they're involved with a lot of the big construction going on, unions, finding ways to make real money. It's interesting that, when you look at this family, there are plenty of wealthy people that are in it, right? I don't think any of these people are starving. But there's not those pronounced major moneymakers, the Andy Campos, the Carmine Sciandras, some of the big pizzeria owners in the Genovese family. There aren't those pronounced people that at least I've found in this family. Again, I don't think any of these people are living on cat food. But some of them do well, but there aren't that many pronounced guys that I guess at least I found. But that's that for the show. That's the Bonanno Crime Family in 2025. And I'll tell you right now, you're not going to find a more complete look into them on the internet. Our goal here on this channel is to provide the most detailed information about not only the mafia today, but the mafia of yesterday. And I appreciate you all watching. If you enjoy what we're doing, make sure you hit that like button. If you want to support our channel further, your support goes a long way, guys. I mean, it allows me to pay someone to create thumbnails for the show. It's allowing me to go do some pretty big podcasts that I think are going to help the channel, and you guys are going to see me in a different light. So if you can contribute, hit that super thanks icon below the video. I hope you enjoyed the show. As always, we'll see you next week here on the Sit Down.